Over the past 3 episodes, we've explored the depth of traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, the incredible work Indigenous communities are doing to protect the land, and the conflicts they face in a world that often ignores their rights. But this is not a story of challenges. It is a story of opportunity. What if we reimagined conservation in a way that placed Indigenous voices at the heart? What if governments, scientists, and communities came together to find solutions that were not just sustainable, but fair? Welcome back to Voices of the Land, the podcast exploring the intersection of Indigenous rights and conservation biology. I'm your host, Ruhi, and in this final episode, we're looking ahead at policy changes, advocacy efforts, and how each of us can play a role in building a future where people and nature thrive together. Let's start with the big idea. Conservation efforts should be Indigenous-led. Decisions regarding land management are often made without the people that know that land best. It's not only a question of fairness, but one of outcomes. Hoagland says research shows lands overseen by Indigenous communities typically have higher levels of biodiversity and less deforestation compared to areas set aside by government decree. Some good news is that progress is already underway. Governments in places like Canada and New Zealand are increasingly giving recognition to Indigenous leadership in conservation, but much more is left to be done. Let's take a look at this passage from Hoagland. There has been an influx in federal agency interest in incorporating traditional ecological knowledge into management practices. The U.S. Department of Interior Fish and Wildlife Service created a TEK fact sheet and identified tribal liaisons within their department. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, Forest Service, and Natural Resource Conservation Service have recognized the value of TEK in various agency-sponsored documents. Even more encouraging is the recently established Tribal Engagement Roadmap created by the USFS Research and Development Branch that explicitly states that traditional ecological knowledge can help the USFS understand and solve current and future natural resource management challenges. The Environmental Protection Agency and the Bureau of Land Management have provided similar commitments to incorporating TEK into management decisions. Lastly, national organizations such as the Ecological Society of America and the Wildlife Society have developed specific working groups of committees focusing on incorporating traditional ecological knowledge. It is apparent that we are making steps in the right direction, but we still have a long journey ahead." End quote. How then do we continue working towards this shift? Let's delve into some concrete policy recommendations that can help bridge the gap between Indigenous rights and modern conservation efforts. Co-management is a responsibility-sharing governance system, often exercised by governments along with Indigenous peoples for protected areas. One of these powerful examples is that of Bear Ears National Monument in the Utah. When first designated in 2016, it was designed to formally include a role for Indigenous tribes in its oversight. In that sense, such approaches honor Indigenous sovereignty and invite TEK to participate in the decision-making process to help implement conservation more effectively. Another key step is recognizing TEK as a legitimate scientific framework. For too long, it's been dismissed as anecdotal or unscientific. But TEK offers insights that Western science often misses. Take fire management. Indigenous communities in California use controlled burns for centuries to prevent wildfires. Today, after decades of catastrophic fires, scientists are finally catching up. They're incorporating these practices into modern fire management plans. By elevating TEK to a status of that of Western science, we can devise conservation strategies that are not only innovative, but also culturally inclusive. Governments should enhance legal protections for Indigenous lands by recognizing land titles, halting illegal deforestation, and enforcing agreements that respect Indigenous sovereignty.
We have to go back to the land. We have to go back to our own ways, our spirituality, and call it in. Call what we lost. Call it back.
For Native people, place, the physical geographical place, is what creates the language, creates the spiritual worldview, creates the people. If I come in and claim your land, I have your basic resource. And I have something even more important than that. I have your identity.
The land wants us back. It wants us to go out with our children and gather berries and be able to participate in the traditional customs, gathering acorns, gathering berries, drying them out for us to be able to survive through the fall and the winter. I feel deeply connected to that when I go out on the land. I am deeply hurting in the times that we're not able to do that.
No one alive today is responsible for what happened in the past. However, we are responsible for knowing what happened.
Without these protections, even the best conservation plans can fall apart. It's time to give Indigenous communities the legal power to defend their lands against exploitation. These policy changes won't happen on their own. They need public support, and that's where you come in. Here are 3 ways you can help. Start by giving financial support to Indigenous peoples' organizations. Groups like the Indigenous Environmental Network, Cultural Survival, and the Amazon Frontlines fight every day for land, water, and rights. Contact your representatives and urge them to support laws that protect Indigenous rights and put TEK at the forefront of conservation. Whether it's through local co-management or international agreements like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, your voice is important. And lastly, learn some history about the land on which you live. Whose territory are you on? How might that be honored in daily living? Share what you're learning with friends and family. Let's take a moment to talk about something you may have heard at public events or on university websites: land acknowledgements. These statements recognize the Indigenous peoples who first inhabited and cared for the land. But what do they really mean? And what should they accomplish? At their best, land acknowledgements are a step towards accountability and education. They remind us of the history of colonization and the resilience of Indigenous communities. But they're not without their challenges. Let's take a look at Georgetown University's land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement should do more than name names. It should also address history and context. In this case, we might ask, what happened to the Nacotchtank and Piscataway Conoy people? How was their land taken? And how has Georgetown University benefited from that history? Unfortunately, Georgetown's statement stops short of answering these deeper questions. Like so many land acknowledgements, it risks becoming performative, a symbolic act unaccompanied by concrete actions. We have come to the end of our journey, but this is just the beginning. Conservation isn't just about saving the planet. It's about justice, respect, and collaboration. We must create a future where people and nature thrive together by centering Indigenous voices and rights. This has been Voices of the Land. Thank you for traveling with us. Let's keep learning, supporting, and advocating for the land and for the people of the land.